Today on the show, I have the pleasure of chatting with the one and only Jim Rogers. Now, for people who don't know who Jim is, Jim has dedicated his life as a financial commentator, an adventurer, and a successful investor. He has been frequently featured in Times Magazine, The Washington Post, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, and just to name a few. And he's had a dedicated career as a successful investor, and he's gone on to publish 12 best-selling books across the globe. He's become a Guinness World Record holder, and now he resides in Singapore. He is best known for his thoughts on global economy while successfully investing whilst traveling. And I'm really pumped and excited to have him on the show today to share his incredible depth of knowledge. But enough out of me, let's get him out here. G'day, Jim. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today, mate?
Reed, I'm delighted to be here. I'm sure I'm going to learn more than you will.
Well, my friend, I always like to ask my guests when they jump on the show, and this is a bit of a curveball. Rewind the clock and tell me how you made your first ever dollar as a kid.
Oh, my first time, I can remember the very night it happened. I was 5 years old. I was picking up, there was a baseball game in the town where my grandparents lived, and the old lady hired me to pick up empty bottles. She paid me 5 cents for every 24 bottles. And one night I made $1.15. I couldn't believe how much money that was. I could not. In fact, I went home and I gave my 3-year-old brother some of it because I just couldn't believe how much money had suddenly fallen into my pocket.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, look, I don't want to do injustice of your background, but you're very well dedicated, decorated, I should say, in terms of your views on the global economy. Do you want to give the listeners just maybe a 30-second to a minute, crash course elevator pitch of what you've achieved in your lifetime? And I could talk for 20 minutes of all the achievements, but I want to hear it from the man himself. To give us a background for people who may not understand or know who you are.
Well, I had a career on Wall Street. It was successful, and I retired when I was 37 because I wanted adventure. I wanted to see the world, and so I set out to see the world. Drove around the world twice, once on a motorcycle, once in a car, as you know, because I wanted to see it all and do it all. I certainly had a little bit of money, and I certainly need and like to make money, but to me, there were other things in life, and I wanted to do some of those things.
And
and by the way, I never had children. I didn't want children. But when I was 60, I had my first child. I realized I was wrong about children. Now I have 2 daughters, and it's fantastic. And if there's anybody who hasn't had children and you're old enough, be sure you do it.
I just had my first daughter. She is 4 months old, and I'm there's bags under these eyes, mate, and it's for a reason. So with that being said, I want to talk a little bit about your perspective on traveling the globe because I'm originally from Australia, moved to the US. I get a lot of impact out of traveling to different countries and seeing how different people live. So what was the draw for you to travel the globe and then successfully invest whilst traveling and seeing how other economies work and what drives them to maybe be a good investment for you and your clients?
Well, I grew up in a town in the backwoods where my phone number was 5. If you grow up in a town like that, you either never leave or you want to see it all. And I was nuts and crazy and insisted on seeing it all. And I found the more I travel, the more I learn. It's a phenomenal education to have to cross a border in a desert or see places you've never been, find your own food, find your own place to sleep. You cannot believe how much you learn about yourself, life, and the world. And I learned many places were certainly not what you read in the press, certainly not what the propaganda says. And from my very first travels, it was very exciting. And so I wanted more of it. I'm sure my children someday will say, Daddy, we wish you'd stayed working longer, but I wanted to use whatever money I had to buy my freedom and to have adventure.
Right. You end up in Singapore these days. Any particular reason, tax reasons, just you want to live in Singapore because you like it?
Well, certainly not tax reasons. I'm an American citizen, so Americans have to pay taxes wherever they are. I wanted my children, many years ago, I tried to tell everybody that China was the next great country. and they should teach their children and grandchildren Mandarin. In those days, by the way, everybody said, no, 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 Japan, Japan, Japan. I mean, we all know what happened. We know the rest of that story now. But then I had this child, and I realized, what am I going to do? Because I realized raising her in New York, she would not speak Mandarin the way she should to prepare her for the 21st century. We tried China. China was very polluted in those days, but it's less polluted now, but it was filthy. So I couldn't bring myself to live in China. Singapore, everything works. They speak English, they speak Mandarin, and it's fantastic education, fantastic everything. So here we are.
Yeah, well, I've never been to Singapore, but I've traveled to a few of the Southeast Asia countries, and it's an incredible part of the world. It's obviously probably very hot there right now, being so close to the equator. But tell me, your thoughts on China these days. It's the world. Everyone talks about the New World Order and the US and losing the control. Where do you see where we are? And given your decorated career, how have you seen it evolved over the years as a China being such a global dominance on the world stage?
Well, China's been great 3 or 4 times. They've been on top. The only country in the world, by the way, that's been on top 3 or 4 times. Rome was great once. Egypt was great once. Britain was great once. But China's been on top, been great 3 or 4 times. It's collapsed 3 or 4 times. But for whatever reason, and I don't know the answer, after a few decades or centuries at the bottom, they turn around and rise to the top again. It's happening again. I can tell you all, they work hard, they save their money, they educate, they discipline their children. I can tell you all sorts of things, but I don't know why it's happened on a recurring basis. It is happening again. There are 1,400,000,000 of them in China. And whether we like it or not, and a lot of people don't like it, China's on the rise again. And it's certainly not good that people try to stop it and fight it. People should work together. We can all have great prosperity. America and China for 30 or 40 years there proceeded to have great prosperity together. Now America's trying to go the other way, but it's happening whether we like it or not.
On that point, how do you navigate that when you're talking to people? Because there seems to be such a big, there's always someone else's fault. It's China's fault. It's America's fault. It's always, there's this dominance at who's going to be at the top of the world power. How do you put all that crap aside and try and just get on and have a fruitful relationship and have the good old days, so to speak, or what you mentioned earlier?
Well, throughout history, no matter what the country, when things start going wrong, the politicians blame the foreigners. It's easy to blame the foreigners. They have different skin, different hair, different eyes, different language, different clothes, different religion, different food. It's very easy. They smell bad and their food smells bad. I can't imagine all the stuff I have heard over the decades about people talking about foreigners and other people. Well, it's happening again. Trump wanted to win some votes, so he started blaming all the foreigners, especially in China. He even blamed the Canadians. He even blamed the Germans. He blamed Japanese. He blamed everybody, but especially the Chinese, because they're the biggest and the most successful and the most visible. Is it good for the world? Of course not. Has it always happened? Yes. Well, it hasn't always ended up in war or something, but at times countries do work together and prosper together. But the easy way, especially for politicians, is to blame the foreigners. Trump and others started doing it, and it's continuing.
Right.
Is it good? No, of course it's not good.
Do you see, and you buy into the rhetoric about the US losing world power and all that sort of stuff and the change in the world order? Do you think that's happening and is transitioning to China? And is that a bad thing?
Well, really, it doesn't matter if it's a bad thing or not. It's always happened. That's the way the world works. Nobody has stayed on top for more than 100, 150 years. It's never happened. It's never happened. So I know that's the way people work. The world works. It is always whoever's on top now will not be on top in 100 years. And there's nothing we can do about that. We can scream all day about it. But and that is what is happening now. America is now the largest debtor nation in the history of the world, and the debts go higher every day. Now, that has never been a way to success, to build up gigantic debts. No country in history that's built up gigantic debts and wars around the world has wound up being on top down the road. And I don't like saying any of this. I'm an American and I have an American family, but it's what's happening. The debts go higher, the overextension goes higher, and America has been on top for a century or so. That has always changed.
Right. No, it's such an interesting concept, and the change of the world order and what's going to happen. I think everyone's starting with monetary policy and having the US dollar as the world currency. Do you see that changing and being a catalyst if it was to go away from that at all?
Well, what I just said about countries being on top also applies to their currencies. No international currency has been on top forever. And unfortunately, the U.S. is driving people away from the dollar now. People in many countries realize that the U.S. is a huge debtor, and there are fundamental reasons for looking for another currency, but also now there are political reasons. Whether Washington gets angry at you, they cut you off.
Right.
And the world's international currency is supposed to be neutral. You can do anything you want to. Anybody can do anything they want to with it. Unfortunately, now Washington cuts you off, and so many countries, even Americans' friends, are starting to say, wait a minute, this could happen to us too. So the world is out there looking for a new competitor to the U.S. dollar. And by the way, Reed, if you know what it's going to be, don't announce it. Send me an email because I'm looking for it. I don't know what it's going to be yet.
You don't think crypto has it? Is it wants to be it?
I don't know. I don't. Well, all money in the future is going to be computer money or crypto money. In China, you can't even take a taxi now with money. You can't buy an ice cream with money. You have to have your money on the phone. And every country is working on it, including the U.S. But when the U.S. finally says, okay, guys, this is money now, I don't think the U.S. is going to say, but if you want to use that money over there, you can use that money. That's not the way governments, especially the American government, works. They want control. They want to regulate everything. So, no, I don't see how many governments are going to say, use anything you want. It would be great for the world. If that were the case, but that's not the way governments think. And the governments have the guns. I don't have the guns. They have the guns.
I want to flip back to what you were saying earlier about the debt, where we come out of 22, I should say, and particularly here in the US, such an increase. We're coming on the Fed just raised it again, so we're between 4.5 and 4.75 on a reserve rate. Other countries around the world, I think I saw a stat that over 90% of countries, central banks are rising in lockstep with the US to keep their dollar competitive. With all the debt that they printed just recently, do you think it was a good thing to help us through COVID? And obviously every other country did it as well, Australia being one of them, US being, Canada being another. And then two, where do you see it going? And are we, they even keeps talking about the debt, but it doesn't seem to get any smaller, right? So let's start with, was it a good thing to print all that money? And secondly, is it going to get any smaller?
It has never been good in history. No country in history has become a great success by printing money and building up gigantic debt. That is good for a while, short term, and it often has been, but it's never worked in the long term. So my answer is no, it's not good. Somebody's going to pay for it. I mean, I'm an old American. It's good to be an old American now. My kids are young Americans. It's not a good time to be a young American because of the debts and the problems that they're going to face in their lifetimes. When Britain went from number one to something else, it was not a good time. In the 1920s, 100 years ago, Britain was the number one. There was no number two. 50 years later, they were bankrupt. Literally, the IMF had to bail them out. And that happened in 50 years. It's happened to everybody. And debt has never been the success. Printing money has never been the way to success. So, I mean, I obviously don't know what's going to happen, but I know what has always happened in the past, and it's going to happen again.
Obviously, do you think we're in a debt bubble, and will it burst? And what does a burst look like for the US if and when it comes?
Well, we've had in the 70s, we had a lot of inflation for a variety of reasons. It was a different world, but we did have a period of very, very high inflation. And the governments had to raise interest rate to break inflation. You know, Reed, you're not going to believe this, but interest rates on short-term treasury bills, 90-day treasury bills in the US were over 21%. That's not a typo. Interest rates have gone up a bit here in the last several weeks, but this is nothing like what has happened in the past when we've had serious inflation problems. So before this is over, interest rates are going to go much, much higher in order to kill inflation. The problem is the central bankers rarely know what they're doing. We've had some good central bankers in history, not many. Most of these guys are bureaucrats and academics. They don't know what they're doing. They're just trying to keep their jobs. They don't care about you and me. They care about their jobs.
So with the increase, the rate of increase in which we've had, and I love you're obviously a lot older than I was trying to look through the history books. Have we seen a rate of increase as quickly as we saw last year in history? I couldn't find anything. If we're going from 0 to 4, it's 400% growth or fourfold.
Well, percentage-wise, that's a huge move. We've had big moves in the past, and certainly in times of crises, some countries suddenly, try to jack up rates a lot. We have to. The world, I don't think anybody has that kind of crisis right now that they have to skyrocket suddenly. Yeah, 0 to 4 is a lot percentage-wise, but to repeat, they were 21%, 21% last time around. So, in my view, we haven't seen the top yet.
Okay. With the natural next question comes: well, if Fed keeps raising, how do they keep paying their own debt? Because I read somewhere, and I can't quote it, but there was some point at which the debt payments would be more than they spend on Medicaid or something like that. If you got to, and I'm again making this up, a figure of like 6 or 7% of the reserve rate. Is there any fear in your mind that they can't they're going to get too much and they can't afford to pay their own debts back? And that would cause some tipping point in your mind?
What you just said was simple arithmetic. I mean, you can get out the numbers and figure it out. And the debt is staggering in the U.S. and put higher interest rates on that. And the numbers come out very, very appalling, frightening. In fact, yes, that's going to happen in the U.S. Is it going to happen in February of 2023? No, but it's going to happen eventually because the debt keeps going higher and higher. Expenses nobody's reducing their debt anywhere. So no, it's going to get much, much worse. And that's going to continue to add to the inflation that's happening. And money printing adds to inflation. There are fundamental changes taking place in the world that cause it looks like we're going to have electric vehicles. Well, electric vehicles use much more copper than gasoline vehicles, much more lead, lithium, things like that. So and nobody's been opening lead mines in the last few decades. So we have many things going on, which are going to mean that inflation is going to be worse. Interest rates are going to go higher and higher. You should be worried.
Do you think with the jobs report that came out just recently that they added in, the last month over 500,000 jobs, that some economists are putting too much weight on the strength of, the economy is still adding more jobs? And if you look back at history, that doesn't necessarily mean you don't have to have pain in unemployment to then reverse the course of reducing interest rates. So, do you think that that's a good thing that we're still seeing the economy adding more jobs to it, or are we sort of 12 months looking in the rearview vision mirror of we're still making decisions around employment are still being made sort of 6 to 12 months ago, and they're not being made in today's interest rate environment where the Fed keeps raising rates again and again?
Well, I'll use the U.S. Since it's the largest. if you print a lot of money and you borrow and spend a lot of money, things are going to be good. Reed, if you give me $5 trillion, I will show you a very good time. We will have the time of your life if you give me $5 trillion to spend and throw around.
Right.
But unfortunately, eventually somebody's got to pay it back.
Right.
Or some consequences. You have to debase it. You have to do something. And when you eventually have to do something, it's usually not fun. Right. We're not to that stage yet, not anywhere near that stage.
Do you think, in your crystal ball, where do you think that stage would come? At what sort of pain point do we have to get to? Is it unemployment going up? Is it something else that we're not seeing? We would not, that the average, American or investor is not aware of, that is going to sort of come and cause it to, all come crashing down?
Well, it has all come crashing down many times in history all over the world. The world has not ended bear markets and bad economic times, although the Secretary of the Treasury in the U.S. says, don't worry, we have things under control now. We won't have economic problems in the future. She has a couple of fancy Ivy League degrees, so if you believe her, then don't worry. We're never going to have problems again. Your new child is going to have a wonderful life. Unfortunately, my reading of history is that we've always had economic problems. Everybody has on a recurring basis, and we will again. It would be great if we never had problems. Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful? But I know that's not the way the world has ever worked. That's not the way history works. That's not the way economics works. That's not the way human beings work. So I don't expect a problem this month. But, we're going to have problems in the next year or two, and they're probably going to be very serious because remember 2008, we had a big problem because of too much debt. Well, my gosh, Reed, since 2009, the debt has skyrocketed everywhere. So the next problem has to be really bad because the debt is so much higher than it's ever been anywhere in history.
As you look at the globe, it's one thing I talk about on this podcast a lot, that 2008 was a US problem that percolated around the world. Today seems to be everyone's at the same starting point. They all had COVID hit. Everyone was locked up. Everyone, people lost their jobs. Central banks were panicking. What do we do? Print more money. Australia did it. Canada did it. European did it. So now we're all at this, I don't want to say starting block, but it seems to be like everyone's like, what's going to happen, and they're all at the same starting block, and it's different. I couldn't find in my research and history where this has all been. Inflation's been a problem in Australia and in the US and in Canada and in Europe at the same time, that we're all trying to deal with and control it at the same time. Any thoughts and comments on that as you compare it again to history, looking back and where we are specifically today in this cycle?
Well, no, usually when you start having major inflation in the world's leading economies, it affects everywhere.
Right.
I mean, Reed, the price of copper is the price everywhere. Mm-hmm. You can't, if the price of copper goes up in Germany, it also goes up in Australia and goes up in Japan. You can't say, oh, we're going to buy cheap copper somehow. You can't say we're going to buy cheap gasoline. No, the price of oil goes up, maybe not the same degree, but the prices go up everywhere. And if people say, oh my gosh, the price of eggs is going through the roof, the people who produce eggs sell the eggs where they can get the most money. So the price of eggs goes up everywhere. No, I'm sorry. Inflation, when it occurs in major economies, usually eventually affects everybody, whether we like it or not.
Right. And then you have the other developing countries who are borrowing in US dollars and have to pay it back. And now the borrowing costs have gone up. So, there's an issue there as well.
Well, if interest rates go up in the US and you have borrowed US dollars, you have to pay our interest rates, whether you like it or not. It would be wonderful if you could figure out a way that we can buy eggs cheaper than everybody and pay less interest rates than everybody else. But I haven't figured out that yet. If you figure it out, let us know.
No, it's just a commentary. It's interesting to see where we're all headed. Jim, coming into 2023? Where are you investing your money these days? What's sort of the advice to the average listener as we come into this high inflationary environment, we're talking about eggs being, and copper being expensive across the globe. This isn't just a US problem like 2008 that's now, around the globe. Where's a smart investor like yourself placing their money these days?
Well, first of all, smart investors should not listen to other people. They should only invest in what they themselves know. That's how you become a smart investor. You don't listen to hot tips. I mean, everybody wants to get rich quick.
Right.
I want easy money. I want fast money. But I know that easy money and fast money is dangerous money. So to be successful, you don't listen to other people. You stay with what you know. If I told you that you could only have 20 investments in your life, you're going to be very careful about what you invest in. You're not going to be listening to some guy you see on the internet. You're going to be very careful, and you're going to be successful. So I can tell you some of the things I'm doing, but please, if I say to you that agriculture's got a great future, do not invest in agriculture unless you like getting out in the sun and getting hot and dirty and know what you're doing, because you're going to fail if you just listen to and copy other people. And when we have inflation, the way to succeed is to own the things that go up in price. So the things that go up in price are usually real assets. I mean, bonds around the world are a bubble. Bonds have never been this expensive in the history of the world, so I cannot find, unless there's a special situation bond somewhere, I would not invest in bonds. Property in many places has become a bubble. If you go to Korea, New Zealand, some parts of the U.S. and other things, there are bubbles already. Some stocks, some of those American tech stocks went up every day. They became a bubble and still are in something of a bubble, but that's true in Korea, Japan, wherever you go. Many stocks have become a bubble. The only thing I know that's still cheap on the historic basis, silver's down 50% from its all-time high. That's not a bubble when something's down 50% from its all-time high. Sugar, oh my God, sugar's down 60 or 70% from its all-time high. So the most real assets, commodities, are cheap on a historic basis, and there are supply problems and demand problems developing in some of these commodities. So that may be a place where people can find good opportunities. And if inflation is going to come back or continue, those are the things that are going to go up. That's what inflation is. Inflation means prices go higher, and you own the things that go higher. You do well.
Right. Are you, we obviously talk a lot about real estate investing on this show, commercial real estate here in the US. What are your thoughts on, if you have any opinions, on, you're talking about bubbles and commercial real estate, particularly multifamily, has seen a big rise in the last 10 to 15 years. Any comments on that for the listeners who I know tune in every single week to hear about multifamily investing?
Well, I know that there's some great multifamily investments somewhere in the world right now, probably many places in the world. I don't know where, because I don't pay that much attention to that sort of investment. But if you know where they are, now, yes, there are bubbles in many places. If you go to Korea or New Zealand, as I said, or some places in the world, multifamily apartments are in a serious bubble. It should be avoided. But that does not mean that they're not great opportunities. Probably in agricultural areas, multifamily apartments are still cheap because agriculture has not been very good for the past 30 or 40 years. So there are bound to be places where you can find good opportunities. There always are. I just do not know them.
Yep, no, it's a good.
Thank you. What you should do is listen to Reed.
As you say, my friend, don't listen to people on the internet, right? You got to. I do like the advice of invest in what you know in. As we come to the end of the show, and we want to be respectful of your time, and I know you're a busy man. Is any sort of advice for investors getting started in today's world, high inflationary stuff? You mentioned hard assets, but in terms of bigger, taking one step back, what's your number one piece of advice that you can give to a person starting out over the decades that you've been investing across the globe in many different countries? What is that sort of number one piece of advice for people starting out today?
Well, first of all, read a lot and learn a lot before you get involved. Even if you're very successful for several months or for a year or two, there's a lot you don't know. At least there was a lot I didn't know in my early days. And so the more you know, and you're going to find out that this is not an easy way to make a living. It looks easy. Everybody said, I could have bought Apple. It's easy. I could have bought Apple. Well, okay. You wouldn't have, and you couldn't have, probably. Anyway, first of all, it's not easy. Second, there's a huge amount you need to learn. And then if you're going to be successful, back to what I said, stay with what you know. That's how people become successful investors. They don't become successful investors jumping in and out of things, listening to hot tips, going down to the bar and listening to all the good stories. That's not the way you become a successful investor. You just be boring. Be boring and stay with what you know. And that's how you will be a very successful investor. But take your time and learn a lot about how it works first. Because one time early in my career, I made it an astonishing success after only 2 or 3 years in the business. And everybody around me was going broke. And all of a sudden, I was making money hand over fist. And I really thought this must be very easy. I'm going to be so rich. Needless to say, a few months later, I had lost everything.
Wow.
Because there were, and by the way, the companies that I invested in eventually did better than I thought they would. But the problem was there was a lot I didn't know. I didn't understand how other investors worked in the market. I didn't understand that many investors don't know what I thought I knew. And you have to learn about not just yourself, not just about your investment. You have to learn about other people and the markets and how they work, because they're not rational. People aren't rational, but markets aren't rational. This is not an easy way to make money.
I love that. People aren't rational, because it's so true. I feel humans are the cause of every recession, right? We talk ourselves in, we do something stupid, we will repeat history over and over again. We won't learn, and we'll end up back to where we were before, and we'll say we'll do things different next time, and we keep on making the same bloody mistakes.
The main lesson that people should learn from history is people do not learn the lessons of history. History is very clear. But people don't pay attention. They don't care. Or they think it's different this time.
Right. They
think they don't need to know history. Well, I now realize history's smarter than I am.
Right. Well, at the end of every show, Jim, we like to dive into the top 5 investing tips. It's a lightning round. I'll ask you 5 quick questions, get your answer. You ready to jump into it?
Well, I am, but I don't know if I can keep up. Go ahead.
Question number 1 is, what's the daily habit you practice to keep on track towards your goals?
Wait, what's the day? I go to the gym every day for at least a couple hours a day. Well, I mean, every day that I can.
Nice.
Obviously, sometimes if I'm on a plane or something, I cannot go. But if I can, I go.
Nice. Question number 2 is, who has been the most influential person in your career over the years?
Well, now I would say my 2 teenage children. I never wanted children. I told you before, children were a horrible waste of time and money. I felt sorry for people who had children, but I would say then I had children and I realized I was wrong. And I have learned enormous amounts from these kids, and I continue to learn every day about life, about people, about everything.
It sounds like it's made you humble in your older years.
As I say, I learned a lot from these little girls.
Another question number 3 is about influence of a tool. So when I'm talking in your business, what is the most influential tool that you use? And when I say tool, it could be a phone, a physical tool, or it could be a piece of software that you just can't run your business without. What is it?
Well, it's reading. You can read from paper newspapers or the internet or phones. There are lots of ways to get access to read things. But the single most important thing for me is reading, reading, reading.
Yeah, I love it.
As much as I can about lots of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Question number 4 is, in one sentence, what has been the biggest failure in your career? What did you learn from that failure?
Oh my God, that's in one word.
One sentence.
That's a day. That's a day. You want to hear about my first wife? Oh my God, enormous mistakes. I told you before, I had a great triumph in the stock market in my early days, which led to my disaster. Losing, I guess that was what the biggest lesson or the biggest teacher for me was, losing everything, even though I was right in the end about those stocks. Every one of them I was right about, but I lost everything first because I didn't understand markets and other people.
As a follow-up question to that, how did you pick yourself back up after losing everything? Because I assume when you get money so quickly that at such a young age, thinking that you're invincible, how do you dust your feet off and your knees off and go again?
Well, you look around, a lot of people have huge failures and they become priests or suicide or run away. I mean, I guess I could have done all of those things, but I didn't want to be a priest. I didn't want to run away, and I certainly didn't want to commit suicide. So all I could do was start over, just start saving my money and trying to come back.
Right.
And I did. I mean, that was the only solution I knew.
Right.
I guess the answer to your question is I just didn't give up.
You didn't give up. No, that's and I think that resilience is such an important thing when you do hit rock bottom and at such a young age, getting to sort of making all this money and thinking it's easy and all that sort of stuff. So one last question before we go. You're an avid traveler, so I'm an avid traveler. What's the best country, what's the best place you've ever visited in your entire life? I'm sure that's there'll be many, but is there one place that sticks out to you, one adventure that sticks out?
Well, I mean, I was once held hostage for 9 days in the Congo. That sticks out. It wasn't particularly fun. When you say sticks out, yeah. If you've been held hostage in the Congo for 9 days, it will stick out. I assure you. If you survive, fortunately, I survived. Here I am alive and can talk about it. But, well, when you travel, when I live in Singapore, if I go out the door, I more or less know what's going to happen to me, whether I go right, left, or straight ahead. But when you're traveling, you never know what will happen in 5 minutes. I mean, you could meet a goddess, you could be dead, you could be in the hospital, you could be in jail. I mean, who knows? And that's the great adventure and the great excitement of traveling to unknown places overland. That is a constant thrill for me. And you learn enormous amounts about the world. I mean, even the failures, as I said, I was held hostage. But you certainly learn a lot from those kind of experiences. I mean, it's a hard way to learn. Divorce is a good way to learn about life. It's not fun. I don't recommend it. But, so failures can lead to great learning experiences and even the disasters going around the world. Yeah. And there was certainly, obviously, plenty when you go around the world. We went through war zones, epidemics, droughts, all sorts of things. But you learn, and that's exciting as long as you survive. It's not exciting if you wind up dead or something, but it was exciting and still is for me.
That's awesome, mate. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, but I do want to respect your time. People want to reach out to you. Where do they go?
Well, I don't have anything to sell. I guess those books I've published, the people can buy those and read those, but I don't have a newsletter or something to sell to people. I don't have a fund. I'm just a simple unemployed person trying to survive.
Jim, you're more than that. I think you're very inspirational to many, many folks who listen to this podcast and subscribe to financial freedom and understanding the global economy. So with that being said, I want to thank you very much for jumping on today's show. I want to reflect some of the things that I took away from today's show. I think your history of just being able to be curious, a boy from a small country town, getting out there, being curious, traveling the world in the way that you've traveled. And for those folks who haven't read Jim's stories, I definitely recommend getting your hands on one of his books. But everything from the Guinness World Record that you hold to creating money on Wall Street, but then to go out and see how other people live their life. I'm very similar to you in that way, that I like to see how other folks live and how other economies work. And it's that curiosity has probably driven you to where you are today. And you have had kids later in your life, and you've had so many awesome experiences. I just want to thank you again for jumping on the show and sharing a little bit of your time, your precious time with us, and the knowledge that you bestow upon us. But did I leave anything out?
Well, you did mention 3 Guinness World Records, and yes, it was fun to do the things to achieve those, but the Guinness Book of Records doesn't pay you rent. my family thought it was great, but Reed, do not think the Guinness Book of World Records is a way to success or prosperity. It's fun, and it's not easy to do some of those things, but you got to keep at it. Don't give up.
But I think
it's to be happy.
But I think it's also the testament to you wanting to be curious and go and challenging yourself. So I think that's the thing I was getting at. But again, my friend, thank you so much for jumping on the show. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll catch up very, very soon.
Well, thank you. Just be careful. Listen to Reed and be careful, because there are going to be some difficult times coming up.
Thank you, my friend. Be well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, there you have it, another cracking episode jam-packed with some incredible advice from Jim Rogers, the Jim Rogers. So if you don't know who Jim Rogers is, Google him. Check out all his books. He is a world-renowned investor, entrepreneur, global traveler, adventurer, and he's got so many awesome views on what's going to happen and what's coming up with the debt, being in such a big debtor market that we're in here, living in the US and printing a lot of money, and where we are going in that, in the next couple of years. We don't have a crystal ball. Getting a bit of Jim's time today, 30 minutes, was incredible, just to hear a little bit about what he is doing in his investments and, investing in hard assets. I think that's a really important lesson to take away from today's show. Look, I want to thank all of you for taking some time out of your day today to listen to Jim. It's definitely a special episode that we brought to you here at Investing in the US podcast. We spent a lot of time trying to get Jim on the show to cultivate something for you guys. So hopefully you're taking a lot away. It's only a very short snippet of his time here, or his snippet into his life. I do encourage you to get your hands on some of his books and to read more about what he is preaching. We only had, again, a short period of time allocated with him today. But definitely check him out. And I want to thank you again all for taking some time out of your day to tune in to continue to grow your financial IQ, because that's what we're all about here on this show. If you do like this show, the easiest way to give back is to give it a 5-star review on iTunes. And we're going to do this all again next week. So remember, be bold, be brave, and go give life a crack.